The story is told of three men lost, wandering through a desert. One of the men is Russian, another one is a Frenchman, and the third man is a Jewish man. They're wandering through this desolate desert, and the Russian man says, "My throat is dry. I'm thirsty. I wish I had vodka." The Frenchman says, "My throat is dry. I'm thirsty. I wish I had champagne." And the Jewish man says, "My throat is dry. I'm thirsty. I probably have diabetes." That is a joke that I think works with almost every demography of the Jewish people because it says something about us and our culture. And that actually, just to be sure about this, is not my personal joke. This was passed down to me by the chain of tradition by a great Borscht Belt comedian named Mickey Freeman, who you can see in this picture. It's a screenshot from a show called The Sergeant Bilko Show. And Jewish humor, like Jewish literature, Jewish music, sacred texts, is all part of a chain of tradition that I would argue goes all the way back to the Torah. We're probably most familiar with Jewish humor being used as a weapon, being used as a defense mechanism against anti-Semites and oppression. And of course, the holiday Purim, that's pretty serious business. Being saved from genocide, the fear, the violence, the political intrigue. And yet, we turn Purim into a holiday of affirmation, a holiday of fun, and we laugh at evil. We laugh and make fun of our oppressors. And this was passed all the way down to the contemporary era. And you can think about a modern-day Haman, Hitler. Jews also, in this case, used comedy as a defense mechanism. If you see that picture, that black and white picture down on the bottom of the screen, that's a screenshot from a Three Stooges short called "I'll Never Heil Again." And the Stooges, I think, are all too unfairly deprecated and denigrated for being lowbrow and slapstick and low class and so on and so forth. And yet they were the first people, not Charlie Chaplin, it was the Three Stooges who were the first people to take on the Nazis and to take on Hitler in Hollywood through humor, even before the United States entered the Second World War. This large picture is a remarkable document because it shows a Purim spiel from 1946 in London. That's right after the war. That's right in the aftermath of the Holocaust. You can see this man playing this dual role of Hitler and Haman. And again, it's humor as a defense, as a weapon. And finally, that color picture up on the top is a shot from Mel Brooks' classic, The Producers. And here you have a story within a story. Dick Shawn, the comedian in the middle, plays a hippie, a drug-addled hippie, who in turn is playing Hitler. And I've heard Mel Brooks say often in interviews, well, I was a World War II veteran, and I think I was in the Battle of the Bulge, and I couldn't defeat Hitler on the battlefield, but I could defeat Hitler via humor. But humor, Jewish humor, is not something that can be used just only as a defense mechanism against anti-Semitism. It can be used to teach Jewish tradition as well. And many of us have reacted to a recent Pew Research study on American Jewish life and American Jews. And among the many findings, and many people were disappointed about the low levels of engagement with traditional Jewish institutions and low levels of observance and identification with Israel, and so on and so forth. But one of the great insights I thought of that study, which people didn't really pay enough attention to, was the fact that 42% of the respondents said that they identified Jewishly via humor. That's a big chunk of people. That's an even larger percentage than, say, identified with their Judaism or with the Jewish community via observance or through affinity with the state of Israel. And this is something that we shouldn't lament, in my opinion. This is a tool, this is an opportunity, something that we can use, this comfort with humor in Jewish life. I'll give you an example, and here you have a picture, sort of a boilerplate fertility goddess idol. So when teaching high school students some verses from Leviticus about not worshiping statues, it's very obvious to them. Okay, don't worship this material object. Don't worship materialism. This is totally ludicrous. This is facile. But how is this relevant to them today? And what I do is I like to take this story and connect it with a Talmudic story from Tractate Avodah Zarah about a great rabbinic sage who once was enjoying himself in a bathhouse, a Roman bathhouse. He's minding his own business when he's confronted by an obnoxious man who says, "Rabbi, what are you doing in here? This is a bathhouse. This is not Jewish culture. And all the more so, we've got a statue over there of Aphrodite, a naked statue. What are you doing in the presence of this idol?" Well, the rabbi responds by saying, "First of all, we can't talk about this in here. This is a bathhouse. I don't talk Torah in bathhouses." So he starts to get this guy thinking. They get outside, and the rabbi says, "Look, you guys were walking around this statue naked, engaged in all kinds of profane activities." The Talmudic language, by the way, is much more salty, but this is a family audience, so I'm saying profane activities. You guys are walking around this object, this statue, this idol of Venus, Aphrodite. Well, if you're not taking this or treating this like a sacred object, why should I? And he really puts this obnoxious guy in his place, and I think he does so. I would read this story in a humorous way. He makes fun of this guy, and he makes fun of this act of idolatry, showing that it's not really a true or genuine spiritual expression. And I like to string this story together with a story from the 20th century about Harpo Marx, of course, one of the great Jewish comedians of all time. Harpo, and this was, I think, in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s, was once invited over to stay at William Randolph Hearst's famous estate, San Simeon in California. And Hearst, this mega millionaire, maybe billionaire, liked to surround himself with beautiful art, modern art, and art from the classic era, antiquities, like these Greco-Roman statues you see here in this picture around Hearst's swimming pool. So Harpo is invited to stay the weekend at Hearst's estate, and you have to figure that you could be in some trouble in inviting one of the Marx brothers to stay over. So while people are asleep, sleeping at night, Harpo sneaks into the rooms of some of the guests and steals the fur coats of these high-class women and then takes them and drapes them all over the statues around the swimming pool. From what I understand, the other guests there, and Hearst especially, didn't find it particularly amusing. But to me, that's another example, teaching the same lesson, making fun of materialism, making fun of statues, idol worship, the worship of wealth. And this is an opportunity that we can take with us today when we think about how to engage contemporary Jews. One of the things that was so interesting about the Pew study was this category of people who call themselves Jews of no religion. And what does that mean exactly? It's kind of a weird phrase. And I feel like I know a lot of these people because these are friends, these are people I've met whose weddings I've performed. And I've done their baby namings, and I've buried their parents, and I've interacted with them through all these different normative Jewish traditions, even though they say that they're not religious. But one thing that they do feel comfortable around, and one thing that is accessible, is Jewish humor. And let's think about Jewish humor, even its secularized form, what an impact it's had on American culture as a whole. These are a few panels from the very first issue of Mad Comics. It was a comic before it was a magazine. And it's a story written by the great Harvey Kurtzman, illustrated by the great Bill Elder, called Ganefs. What is a ganef? Well, we all know that ganef is a thief. It's part of our language, so on and so forth. But Mad was a national magazine. This was something that became very, very central to American culture, had a huge, gigantic impact. And they were able to sort of transition this Jewish humor and synthesize it with American culture as a whole. A more modern example, even though this goes back a few decades as well, is Mel Brooks' classic film, Blazing Saddles, a great deconstruction of all the myths surrounding the Old West. And if you look carefully in this poster from the movie, you'll see an Indian chief, that's Brooks, wearing a headdress. And if you look even closer, you'll see on his headdress, it says kosher lePesach, kosher for Passover. This was an unbelievably financially successful movie, not just because Jews got that joke, but because he synthesized Jewish humor with American culture and brought people in. Well, if we can bring in Americans as a whole, not just Jews, why can't we be using Jewish humor more to engage people and to further Jewish literacy? Why can't we engage people via Jewish humor from the Bible and the Talmud and contemporary culture? This is an opportunity for us. And we all know that Jewish continuity is an issue. Keeping people engaged with contemporary Jewish life is an issue. These are problems. And we should also be honest that there is no single silver bullet that will solve all these problems. But Jewish humor can be one tool in the toolbox to engage Jews, to increase Jewish literacy, and to enhance Jewish identity. Jewish humor is not the only pathway towards continuity, and Jewish humor is not the only pathway towards tradition, but it's one way. It's not a digression, it's a way to bring people in. Thank you.
Thanks for watching Eli Talks. Click through or subscribe to the Eli Talks channel for more inspired Jewish ideas.